niche topic that we're all tremendously interested in. But it's a topic that I'm definitely very interested in and passionate about. How do you build a plurilingual community in an online age when it's simply an Englishnized world? It's designed for one language in many cases, or with one language in mind at the start. So plurilingual, which I actually misspelt on the online version. A multilingual society, many people speak a language in a culture or a space or a network, but not necessarily the same language. We talk about bilingualism, that's generally referring to a person, but when you have a culture of bilingual people, you have a plurilingual society where some people speak multiple languages. So I think designing for, and this is what the Canadian government has done, which we'll talk about later, but designing for a bilingual world where people speak different languages, a multilingual world, is different than designing for a plurilingual world. So definitely the Welsh have a very similar situation in terms of the minority language situation that we have here in Canada. And Cunliffe is a researcher who's done a lot of research over there, and he said, despite the creation of a bilingual environment and the implementation of specific strategies to encourage Welsh use, the trend indicates increasing use of English. But he suggested that there might be strategies that could be used in order to successfully maintain a truly bilingual online community. How can you encourage the use of that minority language? So his recommendations were support the development of terminology and acronyms, which is often what becomes difficult. You'll see on Twitter people shorten language all the time when that's not available. Well, if for instance you're a Japanese speaker and you have many symbols to work with, it's much easier because you don't need to abbreviate things. But when you're talking about French, which is a less character efficient language than English, abbreviations become much more important. And especially considering the official use of language, which often does not encourage abbreviations, helping your community define that is important. Incentivizing free translation was one thing he recommended. And identifying minority language champions was a great way to bring in extra people into the community, and to publish statistics on relative use of different languages, because transparency, he hoped, could increase the use of the minority language. But why is it so important to have multilingual spaces on the internet? Well, I think this is one great example of it here. You'll notice that these are the pink is English speakers in these communities here, and the blue is other languages, as well as the green. And you'll notice there are, in both communities, in every single one of these communities, essential agents who act as connectors, as bridgers between the two communities. And so these invisible, even unconscious translators, as Alida and Golbeck call them, diminish the segmentation of information spheres. They connect us online. And I think this is tremendously important across languages, especially in a multilingual culture like we have now, even if you're not in an institution that officially communicates multilingually. So here's a long quote from Kelly Holmes, where she pointed out that while English is performing a hyper-central function on many commercial websites, over time this is changing because of the importance of large linguistic commercial centers and hubs throughout the world. Other supercentral languages, which was defined by de Swan, those tend to be the Central European languages, as well as Arabic and Chinese, are being upgraded, whereas others that are in less prominence are being downgraded over time. So design could certainly have an impact on this. And I think those of us who design communities and build communities should be thinking about this kind of stuff. And then Dorr wrote in 2004, this move changes the level at which linguistic contestation occurs. And he's talking about economic globalization, and shifts translation responsibility to the producer, and works directly against the process of Englishnization. So there is some hope, is what Dor's suggesting, that these economic supercenters are going to encourage increased multilinguality across the internet. And for any of us in the academic world, international recruiting has always been a very important thing. And I think this is going to become increasingly important with the ease of online contact now. But I think here's the essential question, one account or two when you're talking about a community that speaks multiple languages. Here's a paper they published on meme diffusion, which is the use of a particular hashtag. This is Wang et al.'s paper, and this is the GOP hashtag in the US. And I think this is one of the scariest figures I've ever seen in my life. Because what you have here is, on the left are the Democrats, and on the right are the Republicans, and you have a tiny band of libertarians in the middle. So if this were, I mean, I think this is scary because we need to be talking together, not in opposite poles of the world, if we're going to accomplish anything as a species. And I think the same thing applies in many ways linguistically. If we're creating these segregated networks and nodes where people who speak a specific language are going and they're escaping the majority language, then we're not going to be getting those valuable conversations that need to be happening between people. So let's look at how social media bilingualism is dealt with across the world. In Wales, again, very similar situation here. Welsh is, in Wales itself, only about 500,000 of the 3 million people speak Welsh. But this is their statement of bilingualism, that both languages will be treated equally. Welsh will generally come first in publications. And then in their long list, they said, of course, this applies to social media. So their approach as a politically bilingual nation, defined bilinguality rather, is to have separate accounts. You'll see here the Welsh account and the English account on both Facebook and Twitter, although they do have centralized other accounts, which we'll talk about in a bit. And I think that's an interesting approach, because on one hand, you're saying that we're going to give you access to your information, but on the other hand, we're saying we're going to segregate you from the rest of the community. Your language deserves less attention because that language will generally have the smaller population on it. That's the minority language account. In Switzerland, they have 4 official languages, I believe, and they generally deal with it in a more unified approach. Bilingualism or multilingualism is not as defined in their constitution as it is in Wales. So here we have the Speaker of the House who's communicating in multiple languages and responding in Italian and German. And then over here you can notice that this Swiss account actually labels the tweets with languages before it sends them out. You've got Romansh at the bottom, there's German, English, and French. And it sends all different languages, and not necessarily all tweets are translated. It's generally which piece of content goes for which language. And then in some cases, they do split the accounts. So here they've got their environmental federal office has every single English, French, Italian, and German accounts. And then, interestingly, their Department of Defense is also the Department of Sports. And they have 4 different accounts all at once. Belgium, another bilingual nation, multilingual as well. They do one centralized system of accounts where they communicate in Flemish, I believe, English and German and French. And then on YouTube here, you can see, though, there are some exceptions. As you take each social networking site into consideration, it doesn't make sense to create multiple YouTube accounts. So every single one of these nations has one singular YouTube account where they separate their videos based on language. What do we do in Canada? Well, Tony Clement came out with the Treasury Board's guidelines about how to communicate bilingually. And he said departments should take measures to ensure as much as possible that users of both accounts have an equally profitable experience. Now, I guess that's a very qualitative term. And what does that mean? Does community size impact the experience profitability? And does community composition impact it? I think that's an important question you have to ask yourself as a community manager. Then it also says in the Treasury Board's guidelines, ensure that if using 2 separate single language accounts, that both versions have equal status, both are considered official. So in this case, they're sort of implying status is posting by employees, but does your message reach impact the status? I think that'd be a question. Does getting more eyeballs impact the status of a page? And then they say actively encourage participation in both official languages. But if you tell someone to go somewhere else in order to participate, are you encouraging them? I think that's an important question to ask. So I think in many ways it's important to look at, are you looking at social media as a community or as a broadcasting tower? If you look at it as a broadcasting tower, it's for talking at audiences, being heard instead of listening, and internal voices are greater than external voices. But when you move forward, in the future, the community sense of looking at social media is a forum. Access to information is a much lower priority than interactions are, and relevance, clicks, content, and design are important. And segregation, putting your audiences in different places, decreases interactions over time. So how can you better build a world where you have one account and you still communicate? Well, if you're not using this, and I'm always blown away by how few Facebook managers know this exists, you can enable post privacy gating in your Facebook settings and then target posts. If you have a post that you're sending that's relative to alumni, don't send it to someone whose educational status is in university. Set educational status to graduated, university graduate. You will target the people, you'll receive higher virality and engagement, and you won't waste the attention of the people who are not interested. And again, in the previous talk, if you were here, we talked about EdgeRank. EdgeRank is what determines whether you see content on Facebook in your newsfeed. And that is determined by the number of previous times you've interacted with a friend or page. So each time you post content that I see that I don't like or don't interact with or don't click on, the probability of me seeing your content again decreases. So it behooves you, it makes a lot of sense to target someone based on their likelihood to interact, because you're just going to increase the probability more people will see your content over time. And now you can start using language gating, which uses information that people have supplied to target them based on their language. So you no longer have to chunk language posts into one single post, which we do now. We send out separate French and English posts in cases where there's a lot of text, allowing us to communicate to both audiences while still keeping it centralized on one page. So narrowcasting on Facebook allows you to focus to relevant groups, target recruitment messages, and broadcast promoted posts by language. Twitter, again, I'm always surprised by so many people don't know this. If you start a tweet with the @ symbol, the first username that's contained within that tweet, only people that follow both the sender and that first username will see the tweet in their timeline. So that's considered a reply if it starts with an @ mention. So you can send those all day long and almost no one will see them unless your entire network is connected. So this is how we send customer service tweets. We send 40 a day. If we sent that and everyone saw them, they'd be spamming on our main account. But you can send this in order to target things, and allows you to send person-to-person communications, which you can send in the language of choice, customer service replies, and do it in a non-spammy manner. And then one thing that I'm surprised no page is taken up, why can't you subscribe to a page on Google Plus and subscribe to a circle that you know what it's for? We have to assign people to circles, but you should be able to do it in the opposite way. So I can say, this is the information I want from you. And I think one strategy we're using at the moment is we ask people, would you like to hear from us in French or English? Then we put them in a circle as a result. It's a great first engagement step, lets them know we exist, and lets them know we're thinking about how we're going to communicate to them. Something a lot of people don't think of, when you're naming an account on social media, SEO, search engine optimization, the probability someone's going to find your account, based on the first couple keywords. You'll notice when you're typing it in, it starts to autocomplete. Those first couple keywords, characters rather, are tremendously important. So we advocate that everyone within our community starts everything with UOttawa, one single bilingual identifying keyword that everyone can find. Then after that, it doesn't matter what the text is, because you can get that in the full search that you click through to. But most people will use autocomplete search to find you. If they can't find you here, they're not going to go to your page. So finding that single keyword that everyone in every language community is going to find is tremendously important. Oh. And then again, you can go through to the full language here, and when you have a really long page, it'll truncate through. So there's nothing wrong with having a long title here as long as the first keyword is carefully planned. And again, most SEO on social networking sites is based on your connections. So it's more important that you get people liking your page, and then their friend networks will start moving in. That's how people find you. That's how it's determined whether you're going to be displayed early on. If you ever have a community where you've got multiple languages you want to communicate in, it becomes a pair matching game for content in many ways. How can I find an equivalent RT in the other language? How can I request a translation? If it's in the majority language, for instance, what we usually do will be, hey, if you send a French tweet, I can RT you on this. Since we get far fewer French tweets, we will generally retweet French tweets from our community naturally without requesting translation, because there are some parts of some clubs, some student activities, they're solely in one language. But definitely, especially since we get a lot more requests for retweets in English, we ask those people, hey, is there any way you could give us this language, this content in another language so we can share it with a bigger community? I think this is really important when you're separating text that has multiple languages, or even that has different purposes. Use the pipe. We all grew up learning that the backslash meant over, on top of, greater than, above. And there are implications associated with that you don't want to do when you're separating languages. Do a pipe. That's a nice horizontal neutral line instead of something being over something else. Use a forced line return. If you don't know this, Twitter, you can now hit enter, and you can create a nice space, and you can go all the way enter down. So separate your text. Use a nice visual system on Twitter. Know your truncation limits. Facebook truncates posts after a certain time, so it'll just say read more in the feed. If you're communicating in more than one language, you got to make sure you know when that truncation happens. And if that's going to happen, maybe you want to use targeting to do different languages instead. Use photo content and short captions. Words speak far more in many different languages. And use video extremely sparingly. I think there's this sense that a video is the most important kind of content that we have out there in the university community. Let's create a video, let's make a video. But the amount of staff hours that you put in, when you divide that by the number of views you get, can be a hugely expensive proposition. And especially when you're talking about a bilingual community and trying to put captions on that in both languages, then you're talking about a very expensive and tend to be low return piece of marketing. And encourage conversation, of course. So if we look at some of the data from our accounts, this is our primary facebook.com/UOttawa account. You'll notice there are nearly 3 times as many users who use it in English as opposed to in French. But interestingly, the reach on our average French targeted post is only, or English reach is only 1.5 times to 2 times greater. So there's some kind of discrepancy going in there, or some difference as to why our French posts get a higher relative reach. And so I'm gonna suggest that one of the reasons might be French users are more engaged. And one really important thing is if you have a marketing strategy where you're reaching out to communities that have less content produced in their language, the probability of Facebook serving them that content is increased, and the probability of them engaging because it's in their native language is increased. So less content equals more attention share. And also in the Facebook, not many people know there's a languages section in Facebook. So if someone has multiple languages in there, you can know what they're speaking and target them based on that. It's not just their language interface. But it is important to notice that some of our Facebook data may be because French users have never changed their interface from English. When you look at, this is one of the sort of data that we use. This is People Browser. You may have heard of it, offered by People Browser. And they have a playground where you can search the last 1,000 days of Twitter data purely with a single keyword. It takes a couple hours. And this is the University of Ottawa keyword. You'll notice here the peak happens at about 35 tweets. And this is over an entire year or more, over an entire year, just under actually. So, but if you compare that to our University of Ottawa keyword with the top peak up here at around 800 and the average daily peak sitting just above 10, it's a substantial difference in volume. I'd estimate we're probably looking at maybe 5% of our tweets that we see on all our keywords that we search, which are in both languages, obviously, are maybe 5% is French. That's probably a liberal estimate, even at that. So looking for the content is tremendously important if you're going to try to communicate in multiple languages. So then it comes down to the essential question, one account or two. The government is taking the two account approach, but I absolutely advocate, and I think this is a really important issue, the one account approach. Because while two accounts might make it easier for you as a social media manager, it makes it easier, the management's easier, decreases spam potentially if you want to think of language-based content as spam. The one account increases your findability for both audiences. It increases the audience for the minority, as opposed to giving them a smaller audience, it gives them the greater audience. Greater transparency surrounding bilingual communications. People can see when you've tweeted in both French and English on the same page. And it allows you to build a multilingual community where you work together. And you can leverage the site-specific mechanisms that we've talked about. And so what does the future look like? I think in many ways, I mean, you don't just have to think about it, this is language. It's going to become thematic. You have different themes in your institution where you're going to be building outwards in terms of marketing, and it's going to look a lot like Pinterest. You'll be able to subscribe to organizations based on their relative or based on what language you want to hear from them in and the different topics that you're interested in. How much time am I sitting on? What time?
10:20. We have 5 minutes. And then
Oh, it's 10:20 when we're in?
Yeah, it's over at 10:30.
I think I've gone fairly quickly, so I've got to slow down a little. And again, we're coming back to this thing here. If you separate subscriptions, you really are separating out conversations, which I think can be ultimately dangerous for the communities that you're looking at. And I think this is one of the things that you have difficulty when you're talking to, if you have faculties or different services who are requesting new Facebook pages to expand outwards. Why do they need those pages? And is the primary purpose simply to reinforce the brand that they perceive they need to reinforce? And if that's the only value, then what they're doing is decreasing the probability of conversation occurring on the other pages where those likes may have gone to. So that dilution, wherever it happens, whatever the topics, be it language or thematic, is it absolutely necessary, and will it create a community that wants to talk, or will it simply decrease your overall reach? And I think that's one of the things we have to deal with as university marketers is, do the students always want to talk with us, or do they simply want to use these resources as customer service areas and also rebroadcasting tools for them to allow them to reach a larger audience? So I'd say the major solution is going to be linked conversation boxes. Right now, a lot of the posts will have separate conversation boxes where people can interact under. Blogs will have separate conversation boxes. We need to bring those together. So regardless of what you're saying across different languages, you're going to be heard equivalently. And then multi-post preparation software. If you're posting, you should be able to post across networks and across languages. Also, we need different language-based profiles. LinkedIn has this already where you can create different ones for yourself. Why don't we have this for Facebook pages, etc.? And then the gamification of translation. Social media networks already do this. Twitter has a network of translators. They pay nothing. They give them points in order to get their interface translated. Facebook does the same. How can you gamify that translation on a page-by-page level? And then you could start looking at international communities that could be brought together. This is what a linked conversation box looks like. We've got our two separate pages in French and English, but then the same comment boxes sit down below where you get comments both in French and in English. And that encourages the conversation in both languages, of course, and allows people to hear what everyone is saying. And I think when you think about the future of language, you may have heard of Ray Kurzweil. He's a thinker. He's talked about, and I think this is one of the reasons why we don't see a lot of language-friendly design. Spoken translation is going to be probably common, he's predicting, by the year 2019, that will be significantly accurate. And he said, you know, it depends on the kind of quality you're looking for, but I don't think that's unrealistic. And it's certainly moving faster than he's predicting in some ways. And he believes that by 2029, translation will be near perfect. Of course, the one difficulty with translation is idioms. You can't get turns of phrases or certain untranslatable concepts moving quickly. But this technology, if we can get it to work, do we have sound on this? We don't, eh? Let's see if we have, oh, doesn't look like it's gonna work. Okay, well anyhow, Rick Rashid, the Chief Research Officer at Microsoft, this is a great video if you can go look it up online. They've just developed a real-time voice translation software that does really high quality translation. They had it in Cantonese at this presentation in Hong Kong, and every single time he spoke and it translated within seconds, everyone in the crowd applauded at the quality of the translation from his voice, which from my understanding, Cantonese is, and Mandarin for that matter, are tremendously difficult to translate to directly from English in spoken language. So they're using massive amounts of data, and this is probably going to be coming to our customer service booths very soon. I would see a future where Google Hangouts are used to interact with students to recruit them, and in cases where there are languages where we can't help them out, using these kinds of softwares to mediate that interaction. And I think this is what a lot of big organizations are thinking too. So at Translation Automation, they've talked about what is mechanical translation for the simple reason that we can't process enough volume. It's going to become the major source that we use in the future. And right now, why are social networking site executives not interested in the universal or in making language-friendly design? I think it's because they expect this universal translator to come somewhere down the line. They've covered language-based ads. You can target people with ads, and they've covered pages where you can pay to target people with languages, but there's no incentive to give us the ability to target by language because all they want is more from us. They want more interaction, so allowing us to target fewer people is not within their financial goals or interests. So it's probably not likely we're going to get the same kind of code from a financially driven organization, or at least not one with a board of governors that's, or board of directors that's purely vested in selling our attention that way. But I think it does matter nonetheless, because we need to prevent link breakage between users simply based on them having different languages. That's preserving relationships, and in the long run, I think that's what's going to make the internet a better place. Organizations still want to control their language-based broadcasting because idioms, again, as we mentioned previously. So we're going to need more options like this to talk to different language-based communities. And increasing expectations from multilingual public and nonprofit organizations are obviously going to push for this. And we need to prevent the Englishnization of the internet. Lots of startups will tend to start even out of Europe. Their first language tends to be English because that's the marketing language of the internet. And as long as we can promote design that acknowledges other languages, I think we can prevent that going forward and encourage the use of these other supercentral and hopefully the non-supercentral languages. So I guess the main messages I've got before we finish just a little bit early is create a unique approach for each social networking site. Consider the implications of separating your communities and increase your marketing efficiency with targeting wherever possible. Link those conversations up and pick a language agnostic brand keyword, or for that matter, even if you're a multilingually focused organization, know what your keyword is. The University of Toronto is not an effective way to market yourself. Neither is University of. You've got to have a short single keyword that'll propagate across our hashtag future. Otherwise, you're going to become a very long string that's difficult to track and becomes diluted as many different words. One big problem we have, we're Ottawa U, when Ottawa U is in fact also in Kansas. So we are, U Ottawa is officially what we are. However, we have to go on the other hashtag and ask people before we perform customer service, do you mean Kansas or Canada? So defining that brand and picking your central keyword where people are going to interact with, I think the sooner you do it, the greater the value will be in the long run. So does anyone have any questions? And thanks very much for everyone for coming and listening in. Don't be shy. Yes.
As a person watching you on Twitter, I subscribe to follow Twitter, and you're posting in both languages, and I thought twice and only is
That's true, and that's the one argument, I mean, against the single language is that you increase language spam. So my argument would be, if you post them both simultaneously, and you tend to post them in the same order, such as one language goes before the other, or et cetera, it will minimize the spamminess of the content. People will learn to flip over your second tweet or know that it's there. And also, the other argument is, by exposing people to the other language, you may increase their efficiency in it. So you're encouraging the bilingualization of your society by, or your community rather, by exposing them to both languages. So I think the value of allowing both languages to be seen over is greater than the loss you would experience by separating them. But yeah, it is a form of spamminess, definitely. And I would hope that Twitter gets to the point in the future where they can allow us to target by language as well.
Fascinating stuff.
Oh, it's very niche, definitely. But thanks very much for coming.
Thank you, Adrian. So we'll go off to break now. Break is